Open your refrigerator and listen to it hum. That sound costs money every hour. In 1948, a farm kept its milk cold with no power at all. No compressor, no coils, no motor cycling on and off in the night, no block of ice hauled in on a wagon and paid for by the pound. A small stone building set into a hillside with water running through the floor of it, and inside that building, cream and butter and milk sitting at a steady temperature that never once moved more than a few degrees in either direction, summer or winter, for 80 years. They called it the Springhouse, and the reason you have never seen one is not that it stopped working. It works today. It is working right now under every hillside in this country where a spring comes out of the ground and the water coming out of it is the same temperature it was in 1948. Nobody turned it off. We just stopped building the room. I grew up on a place that still had one. Stone walls 2 feet thick, a low ceiling I could touch by the time I was 12, a door on the north side that never got sun, and a trough cut into the floor with water moving through it the whole time I knew that building. You went down there on an August afternoon and it was another world, cold on your arms, the smell of wet stone and milk, and a sound underneath everything like the building itself was breathing. I want to tell you exactly how that worked because almost everybody gets it wrong, including the people who write about it. The part that mattered was not the cold. It was something else, and once you understand it, you can use it in your own kitchen tonight without spending a dollar. By the end of this, you will know where that temperature actually came from and why it was the same in January as in July. You will know the one thing about that water that did all the work, and it is not how cold it was. You will know why a spring house in Pennsylvania kept a family fed and the same building in Georgia was close to useless. And you will know the honest limit of it, the thing the old-time books leave out, which is what a spring house could not do and what people did instead. Stay with me because the second part is the one you can actually use. Here is the first thing, and it is the piece people get backward. A spring house does not store cold. A spring house removes heat. That sounds like the same sentence twice. It is not. It is the difference between two completely different machines, and everything else follows from it. Think about a root cellar or an old stone cellar under a house. That is a battery. You seal it up. The mass of the earth and the stone holds a certain amount of cold, and every warm thing you put in there spends a little of it. Put in a crate of apples straight off the tree in September, and the whole cellar warms up for a day or two while it absorbs them. It works, but it has a limit, and the limit is how much cold it was holding when you open the door. A spring house is not a battery. It is a pipeline. Water arrives out of the ground at one end, carries heat away, and leaves at the other end. And then more water arrives behind it. It never runs down. There is no charge to use up. You could set a warm crock in that trough every hour of every day for 100 years, and the water coming in the upstream side would not be 1 degree warmer for it because the water that took your heat is already gone down the hill and out of the building. That is not storage. That is a conveyor belt for heat running on gravity, and the fuel is rain that fell on that hillside years before you were born. So where did the temperature come from? This is the part that genuinely surprises people. Groundwater is not cold because it is underground and dark. Groundwater sits at roughly the average yearly air temperature of the place it comes from. That is the whole rule. Take every temperature that happens over a full year, where you are standing, the January nights and the July afternoons, average them together, and that number is roughly what comes out of a shallow spring in your county, which is why the depth matters so much. Down a few feet, the ground still swings with the seasons. Go deeper, and those swings flatten out, until at a certain depth the ground has no idea what month it is. It has averaged out every summer and every winter that ever happened above it into one number, and it holds that number all year. In Pennsylvania and Virginia and through the Appalachians, that number is somewhere around 50 to 55 degrees. Up in northern Minnesota and Wisconsin, it is colder, low 40s in places. And down in the deep south, it is 65, sometimes higher. Now, you know something about American farm history that most historians never mention. Spring houses were not evenly spread across this country, and it was not culture that decided it. It was that average. A spring house in Lancaster County was a working cold room. The exact same building in South Georgia gave you 65-degree water, which is barely cooler than a shaded porch, and it was not worth the stone it took to build. The geography drew the map, not the people. You can check this for your own county in about a minute. Look up the average annual temperature where you live, not the summer average, the whole year average together. That number is roughly what is waiting a few feet under your feet right now, And it has been waiting there the entire time you have owned that house. I went back to that old place a few years ago with a thermometer in my pocket because I wanted a number instead of a memory. The water coming out of the ground in August read 52 degrees. I went back in February when there was snow on the hill and the air was in the 20s and it read 51. 1 degree of difference across the whole swing of a year. The air above it had moved 70 degrees in that time, and the water had moved one. Then I walked over to the neighbor's place, where there is a dug cellar under the old kitchen, no spring, just a hole in the ground with a door on it. His cellar in August was 68 degrees. Same hillside, same county, same dirt, 16 degrees apart, and the only difference between the two buildings was that one of them had water moving through it, and the other one was holding its breath. That is the number I want you to keep, not 5216, and understand what the competition was. The alternative to a spring house was ice, and ice cost money. Either you cut it out of a pond in January and hauled it into a sawdust-packed ice house and hoped it lasted into August, which was days of brutal work, or you paid the ice wagon by the block week after week all summer. A family on a spring paid neither. The water came out of the hill on its own, and it never sent a bill, and it never failed to show up. That was the whole appeal, and it is the reason those buildings went up in stone and were built to last a century. If this is already making you think about the ground under your own house, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on while you are there. I put out one of these every week, the old practical knowledge that worked for 100 years and got quietly replaced by something with a meter on it. The bell is the only way these reach you. Then stay right here because the next part is the one you can use tonight. Here is the second part, and it is the whole trick. It was never really about the temperature, it was about the water touching the crock. 52-degree air and 52-degree water are not the same tool. They are not even close. Water carries heat away roughly 25 times faster than air at the very same temperature. 25 times. That is not a small advantage, and it is the entire reason the trough existed instead of just a cold room with shelves. You already know this in your body. 50-degree air is a pleasant spring morning in a light jacket. 50-degree water will take the breath out of your chest in seconds. Same number, completely different experience, and a crock of milk feels that difference exactly the way you do. And then there is the second half of it. The water was moving. Set a jar in a basin of still water, and the water right against the glass warms up and stays there, a thin, warm skin wrapped around the jar, and that skin is now insulating the very thing you were trying to cool. In a Springhouse trough, that warmed water is carried off the instant it forms and replaced from the source. The warm skin never gets to exist, cold water touching it and the water always leaving. That is the trick. That is the whole thing. You can prove this in 20 minutes, and I would rather you tested it than believe me. 2 identical containers of hot tap water, one in the refrigerator, one in the sink, and a few inches of cold water with the tap trickling. Come back and feel them. The one in the sink will not be close. Your refrigerator is 30 degrees colder than that tap water, and it still loses badly because it is trying to move heat with air, and the sink is moving it with water. Now let me tell you about the money, because this one is not the story you are expecting. I'm not going to tell you the refrigerator was a swindle. It was not. It is a better machine in every way that counts. It reaches temperatures a spring cannot touch, and it works in Phoenix in August. It won, honestly, but look at what came off the plans with it. Once a house had one, the builder had no reason to dig a cold cellar, no reason to plumb a cool room, no reason to think about which side of the house never took sun. Hey, those things came out of the drawings, at one house plan at a time, until the standard American house had no cool place in it at all. And here is the part that ought to bother you. The exact physics of a spring house is being sold back to you right now. A ground source heat pump does precisely what that stone building did, moving heat into ground that stays at the local yearly average, and it is marketed as advanced technology at $20,000 or $30,000 installed. It is a good product, but it is not new. It is a spring house with a compressor and a warranty. I am not telling you anybody hid this. Nobody did. What happened is worse than hiding and simpler. It is a quiet agreement among everybody who builds and sells to never ask which parts of the job the ground could still do for free. Nobody has to coordinate. There is just nothing in it for anybody, and so it never comes up, and it has not come up for 70 years. If that landed, hit like and subscribe and ring that bell. Now here is the third part, the one the farm wives knew and almost nobody writes down. The third part is the vessel. She was not careless about what went in that trough, wide and shallow, beat tall and narrow every time, because what mattered was how much of the container the water could touch. A tall crock with a small footprint has most of its contents sitting up in the air where nothing useful is happening. A shallow pan has almost all of its milk within an inch of moving water. That is why the cream pans in an old Springhouse were broad and low. Two jobs at once: all that surface let the cream rise and be skimmed, and all that surface let the water pull the heat out fast. Depth of setting mattered too. Crocks went into the trough up to the shoulder, not just standing in an inch of water. Every inch of the wall that the water covered was working, and every inch above the line was doing nothing. None of this was written down anywhere. It was learned by watching which pan soured first, and metal beat stoneware, which surprises people who picture a Springhouse full of pottery. A steel milk can moves heat far better than fired clay does. The heavy crocks were used because they were what a farm had, because they did not dent, and because they would not taint the milk. When dairy cans came along, the cans went into the trough and they chilled quicker than anything before them. Now the warnings, and this is the part the old books leave out entirely, so I want to be plain with you. A Springhouse is not a refrigerator, and the gap is not small. Modern food safety draws its line at 40 degrees. Below that, the bacteria that make people sick slow to a crawl. A good Springhouse gave you around 50, and 50 is on the wrong side of that line. Not disastrously wrong, but wrong. So understand what that meant in practice. Springhouse milk was not good for a week. It bought a day, maybe two in the best of weather, and that is exactly why those farms milked twice a day and used it up as it came. It is also why every one of those kitchens knew how to turn milk into something that keeps. Butter, buttermilk, cheese, clabber. That was not a hobby, and it was not tradition for its own sake. That was the real preservation system, and the Springhouse was only the loading dock in front of it. They also lived with a level of spoilage that you would not accept and should not accept. When people tell you the old ways were as good as a refrigerator, that is the part they are leaving out. Second, on the water itself. Do not assume spring or well water is clean because it is cold and clear and comes out of a rock. Springs near pasture and cropland pick up coliform bacteria, nitrate, and parasites like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, and none of that changes the taste or the look of it. If you have a spring or a well on your place, have it tested. It is inexpensive. Your county extension office will tell you where, and you want to know before it is touching food or going into a glass. Third, and separate from all of that, raw and pasteurized milk carries its own real risk regardless of how cold you keep it. Listeria, Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter. Cold slows those organisms. It does not remove them. That is a decision for you and your doctor, and I'm not going to pretend the temperature question settles it. Fourth, an open trough of water is a drowning hazard for a small child in a mosquito nursery if the flow ever stops. The flow is the safety feature. A Springhouse that quits running is just a damp stone box. So here is what to actually do with all of this starting tonight. Use water to cool, not air. When you have a hot pot of soup or stock or a big pan of anything that needs to come down, do not put it straight in the refrigerator. Set it in the sink in a few inches of cold water, stir it now and then, and let the tap trickle so the warm water carries off. It will be cold in a fraction of the time. This is not a folk trick. It is the recommended way to cool hot food quickly, precisely because hot food sitting in the middle of the danger range for hours is how people get sick, and a refrigerator full of warm pots cools nothing well. Put a thermometer inside your refrigerator, $6. Not the dial on the wall, an actual thermometer on a shelf. Most home refrigerators do not run where their owners think they do, and the fix for a warm one is usually free. That is the single highest value thing in this entire video. If you have a basement, a crawl space, or a cool north corner, learn what it is actually good for, which is not dairy or meat or eggs. It is potatoes, onions, winter squash, apples, cabbage, hard cheese, canned goods, cider, the things that were down there for a reason. You put your $6 thermometer down there for a week first and find out what you really have. And on a hot day, when you want a pitcher of water cold without opening the refrigerator 20 times, stand it in a bowl of water with a wet cloth draped over it. Somewhere a little air moves. The evaporation off that cloth holds it cooler than the room all day for nothing. If you have gotten this far with me, hit like, subscribe, and turn on that bell. Nobody sponsors a video about a stone trough and a bowl of water, so the only thing keeping this in front of people is you. One more thing, because it is the part I actually remember rather than the part I researched. That Springhouse was not only where the milk went. It was the coolest place on the farm, and on a heyday in July, it was the closest thing to mercy anybody had. You came off that field with chaff down your shirt, went down those steps into the cold and the sound of the water. pulled the buttermilk crock out of the trough, and drank it standing there with the door open. The building did a job nobody had written on any list. It gave people somewhere to go. I asked my grandmother once what she missed about the old place. I expected her to say the house. She said the Springhouse. She said it was the only thing on that farm that did its work, whether anybody was watching or not. You did not forget this. Nobody taught you, and then you forgot. It was taken out one house plan at a time until you ended up in a building with no cool room in it, paying by the hour for a temperature the ground under your feet would hand you for free. So do one thing this week. Put a thermometer in your refrigerator and cool the next hot pot in the sink. Then tell me in the comments what that thermometer said, what county you are in, and whether a Springhouse still stands on any place you know. I read everyone, and those stories are the reason I keep recording. And if this rang true to you, come back for the next one, because I'm going to show you how she kept a crock of eggs good from spring through to Christmas with no cold at all, using one thing that cost 30 cents at the general store and is still sold today. Nobody teaches it. I will. Keep it simple, keep it yours. And remember, the people who ran a dairy on a hillside and a stone trough knew things we are only beginning to remember. 3 notes on the build. The reframe is a Springhouse does not store cold, it removes heat, and the counterintuitive second part is that the water's motion mattered more than its temperature. Water moves heat about 25 times faster than air, which is why the sink beats the refrigerator on a hot pot. A real, testable, slightly shocking fact that gives the viewer something to do tonight. That's the same shape as vinegar is an acid, and she was keeping it dry. I made the follow the money section honest rather than villainous, because on this topic, a conspiracy angle would collapse under the first informed comment. The refrigerator genuinely won on merit. The defensible grievance is that the cold room got designed out of American houses and the ground source heat pump now sells the same physics for $30,000 as an innovation. That lands harder than a fake villain, and it can't be fact-checked against you. I fixed the sequel collision I flagged last time. The 2 cast iron teases we're about to read is the same video, so this one hands off to water glass egg preservation instead, which follows naturally from cold storage and is genuinely real. That leaves you 1 clean cast iron episode to write whenever you want it, and I'd suggest folding cleaning and seasoning into that single video rather than splitting them.